Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, just become afternoon. So, as I said, one of the toughest parts of the think tanks is trying to stop people talking at the end of the think tanks. So, what we're going to do now very quickly is to go around the different tables, because one of the issues with the think tanks is people wish that they join other think tanks as well to get more than one perspective. So we're going to go around the think tanks, hear from the leaders on what was discussed briefly, and then so you'll get an idea of what was discussed in the whole session. Before we do this, just a quick reminder, if anyone's going to be leaving early, you've got evaluation forms on the table. Please complete the evaluation forms. We do take them very seriously, and as we said before, they're your conferences. Let us know how you want your conferences to be. So please complete the evaluation forms. And after this, we'll be having a lunch. And after that, we're going to have a session on the awards program, talking about, understanding, some ideas of why some of the companies won the awards, the processes they went to become finalists or award winners, in the hope that those of you who did win awards will strive and continue to win them next year. Those of you who never entered or were unfortunate this year, to make sure, to encourage you to up your game, because I think the awards were a great success, definitely from a judging and judges' perspective. So it's a great way to reach some of the most important people in the automotive logistics industry in Europe if you enter the awards. So we're going to start in numerical order. Number 4. I never was good at maths. So Hartmut, and here you are. The logistics blockchain. Okay. So a simple subject, so it'll probably take 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, we had an impressive participation in that round table from an OEM, from suppliers, from logistics providers, and from IT companies. So on the round table, we already asked the question, what are you associating? And we were hearing the, let's say, typical things like payment, proof of delivery, automatic transaction, traceability, getting paperless, overall integration, integrity of data, etc. So things that you typically associate with the blockchain. And we also found out that nobody at the table has a real blockchain example in his company. Some has run a trial probably here or tested out something in a research and development phase, yeah. But nobody at this table has a real practical example today. So blockchain is still has a question mark, or is it a hype, or what is the real value? So then we discussed a bit that blockchain is probably just a technology to bring together data, but at the same time, rights and obligations in one system. And so it's probably just a data layer, basically, to make it simple. We discussed some analogies, how blockchain can be, let's say, reflected with the real world. So a smart contract, what is a smart contract? Putting money on a table, everybody sees that, and the one who has the right to get it grasps it, and everybody agrees, yes, he has the right. So analogies like that we were used a lot in our discussion group to make things, let's say, more understandable, more practical for our environment, because, frankly spoken, none of us was a blockchain expert. So then we also discussed what the blockchain will not do. Yeah? The blockchain will not calculate ETAs. The blockchain will not replace the necessity to trace devices in the physical world. The blockchain will not avoid theft. Yeah? So there is some hopes around blockchain that will not become true. It's a data layer, managing data in a different way, and in a more, let's say, trusted way when it comes to the past. But what happens now in the real world, the blockchain will not tell that. So then we concluded that as nobody at this table was a blockchain expert, blockchain will be like most innovations, finding partners to go together with. And the early adoptions of blockchain we found would probably be in the world of administration, so with things where processes are pretty much defined, where data is defined today, and administration and transaction, payment transaction, this is probably the space where the blockchain will see first applications also in the logistics space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hartmut. So next we're going to see supply chain bottlenecks. Surely there are no supply chain bottlenecks.
As we were number 7 on the list, I was hoping I'd have another 5 or 10 minutes to write the notes on this. In discussing supply chain bottlenecks, when you see the title, you'll realise the word Brexit was tagged on to the end of it. And after yesterday's vote, where 30% of the room thought Brexit will never happen, I was a bit paranoid about hosting this session. Thankfully, everybody in the think tank thought Brexit would happen, so we're okay. But 2 themes emerged from our discussion around supply chain bottlenecks. One, of course, was Brexit. The other one was drivers. And actually, some of the solutions that we talked about, we think actually address both. One of the things that we touched on supply chain bottlenecks is there is now an increased move to modal shift, be it the use of trains, be it the use of longer distance sea routes, to start addressing some of these challenges. And there was a view that as we came out of the financial crisis, there was overcapacity, too much capacity in equipment, too much capacity in driver labour. That's now gone, and so actually there's now an increasing trend back towards some of the longer distance sea routes and train as a potential solution. On the theme of driver shortage, there was probably 4 or 5 key recommendations that certainly I scribbled down. I apologise if I've not taken these notes correctly. We were talking about better selection of third-party logistics providers and actually engaging with people who are taking a proactive approach to driver employment, potentially longer-term contracts with service providers to incentivise them to invest in training programs and recruitment programs. There was a view that actually we discount 50% of the labour pool because of the quality or the lack of quality of equipment and facilities we provide to drivers. It's unattractive to females, and therefore we're immediately discounting 50% of the potential workforce. And then on images and facilities, there was a lot of discussion around the collaboration between the big manufacturers and the city authorities to provide suitable accommodation for truck parking overnight for hauliers. And if we're recognising that people are sleeping in cabs during the course of the working week, then addressing facilities is a key issue, and that's seen as a collaboration between the city authorities and the manufacturers. Moving on to the Brexit theme, I guess the 4 or 5 points that we came out with, there was we did quite a few voting and polls as we went through the discussion, and the general view of the table was in terms of preparedness for Brexit, we scored it 2 out of 10. So at that point, I think I just wanted to run for the exit and get away from this. The second issue that's going to cause me trouble tomorrow when I meet up with our finance director is the view of the table is it's the ports that need to take a leading role in investing in solutions, capacity and infrastructure. So I won't be popular when I report that back to our FD tomorrow. When we're starting to investigate what people think some of the impacts on Brexit would be, and the view is it will impact the parts and component supply chain more than finished cars. And the view is that stocks will generally increase by a day. So when you go through, currently when you trade outside of the EU, the process you normally add in 1 day for customs clearance. But then there's a view that because you've got 12 months of instability ahead once Brexit happens, not only do you have that 1 day, but you'll need to carry a significant amount of safety stock and contingency stock. And so as a result of that and the cost that will come from that, the pressure's really on service providers to come up with innovative solutions to try and mitigate some of those effects. So it was a really interesting conversation. I wish I'd taken notes better and could give you more feedback, but that's unless I talk for an hour, that's a brief summary of where we got to. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And keeping to the numerical order, so we went 4, 7, 5 must be next, I guess. Rodney, Salmon, 3D printing.
Hi. So we had a very innovative discussion on 3D printing and really covered the speed that 3D printing has covered during the last 10 years and having a think about some innovation going forward in the next 10 years. We spoke about the quality, the cost, and the timing, and that's really going to see how 3D printing develops in the future. It would have been good to have a car manufacturer on the table because they're way in advance of this with prototype parts that are currently being made in the world, and not just all different materials as well. Metal materials, aluminium materials, now prototype parts are being made. In the packaging industry, 3 years ago, to make a small plastic tote, you could only make it out of a nylon on 3D printing, and it took a week to make. Yeah? Now, exactly the same box can be made out of different plastics, and it takes 8 hours. So there's huge advance in time and quality already being made. We discussed which parts of the automotive supply chain would be most affected and which ones would possibly be affected first. And we looked at the aftermarket sales. And we said that it's going to be interesting that now currently aftermarket parts are being stored for many years because the OEMs have to store these parts. And now the quality of the parts is different to be stored over a long period of time. So now the opportunity to 3D print these parts means that there's no storage and there's no hardly any transport costs. So moving on from that, we then said, looking into the future, there's a lot of parts that will be 3D printed by the tier suppliers. So the actual opportunity to actually store and transport these parts won't be necessary. They'll be printed within the parts. We then moved on and looked at further innovation in not just the automotive, but outside automotive into retail. So we see that Adidas and Nike at the moment are 3D printing the base of the trainers. Right? And so we looked at then 3 aspects of what would happen in the future. What could happen in the future? What would the automotive supply chains look like in the future? What would the spare parts and the garages and the actually OEM line side would look like? So we went back onto the retail and said, actually, more than the possibility that in the future, right, there'll be no need for shops to have store any parts. Because with choice and what people want these days in the trainers, whether they want different colored laces, different base, different side, different material, you walk into a shop and you would design your own trainer and then it would be 3D printed while you waited. So suddenly there's a whole supply chain that's just been wiped away. We then went back into automotive to talk about it, after sales parts, and said actually, thinking about it, the garages that currently have to have parts delivered to them on a daily basis because of demand, okay, they would 3D print parts. So how would the LLPs, no storage, no transport, suddenly a whole part of the supply chain wiped out? We then went further and talked about car parks. So nowadays, retail car parks, certainly in Europe and I'd said in the US as well, where all the different car manufacturers are in a very close proximity for selling cars. And so you would have a situation where basically the car spares, the parts, the servicing, everything would be all supplied by a common 3D printer being able to supply parts for Toyota garage there, for Ford garage there, for Nissan garage there, etc. So the innovation going forward, and we said, well, how long is that away? You know, how far is that away? And the development certainly now is happening with spare parts. So not too far away. What's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years? Some of that, what we just talked about, could happen. But we said it's really down to cost, time, and quality. And can you get that cost, time, and quality, and how quickly can that happen? And so we are looking forward now to sort of doing further reviews and understanding, you know, where does 3D printing going and how quickly will it take? That's what we ended up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rodney. And now we'll be looking at connected logistics. And I hand over to Veronica. Please, thank you, Veronica.
Thank you. We had a mixture here on our table from IT providers, from logistics providers for containers, pallets, and so on. And one was a specialist in aircraft transmitting technology if you need something of information on a flight for logistics. So the first point was that we explained and analyzed a bit that the first sector in logistics that was connected probably were vehicles, because we have the telematic solutions in place for trucks and trailers. For example, in our company, we do it for Schmidt's Cargo Bolt telematics since 2003. This is 15 years now. So all this information in some ways has ever been at least partly used for logistics, because usually you know in which truck or which trailer your goods are. So there was a way, but now we have further ways to track the goods, because we can, with Internet of Things, we can track every pallet, every container, everything on the plane, and so on. So we were discussing a specific logistics case in the automotive sector, which is quite an urgent case to solve, which is the transportation of batteries for electrical vehicles. We know that several OEMs are working in this field, and I explained that we are gathering experiences with some OEMs, because this is a very delicate transportation and a delicate case of tracking, because we need to track temperature, humidity, and have really a granted transmission of data. So we discussed this as an example and current challenge in the automotive inbound logistics. And we also had a look in what is now right on the market already, a wide range of different IoT devices, depending on your use case and depending on what you want to track and which kind of parameters you want to measure. So I was giving a little bit an overview, because we have many of those solutions end-to-end, including hardware and so on, already in place. It just depends on what you need. We also explained that in IoT for logistics, something very important is arising, which is the narrowband IoT, which means really a game change for logistics as well, because these devices, they will be very cheap. They have a very long-lasting battery until 5 or 10 years, and they can do very simple tracking functions. They connect directly to the existing telecommunication networks, transmitting their data to those networks, like the 3G, 4G, and in future the 5G. So this will be something revolutionary for logistics. We also talked about business models with IoT devices, because some companies want to buy them, others they just want to pay by a per use and rental models and so on, which is also relevant. And we talked about reverse logistics for IoT devices, because you need to have some circular logistics, also established, because many of those devices are quite expensive, and you need to recover them and recycle them. So we also have already a concept for reverse logistics for IoT devices, which was interesting for our counterpart here on the table about container logistics. So I think that's it. And of course, we were talking about the problem, how can you track your goods on an aircraft? And we have also a solution for that, because some IoT devices, they just have sensors inside, so they can detect when the aircraft goes into the flight mode. When the device will change to a sleep mode in between, just gather relevant data like temperature and humidity and so on, and will transmit when the plane is landed. because the sensors will discover, okay, I'm now on the ground again, so the data can be transmitted. So we talked also a little bit about this. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica from T-Systems. Thank you. Now we're going to be looking at finished vehicle logistics. And over to our friends from ICL, and Pat to give us the highlights from the discussion.
I'm just going to stand over here so my back is not to anyone. We had a rather wide-ranging discussion about how we could improve vehicle logistics today, this week, this year, as opposed to, automated facilities and self-driving vehicles within facilities. Two very key themes came up, and we had a wide range from OEM, port, car carrier, and other logistics providers in our small group of 7. But like I said, two very key themes, which we haven't rediscovered the world here. Increased visibility for the OEMs, increased visibility between legs and between logistics providers. When vehicles are at the port, the car carriers need to know when they can come and pick them up, and having better information will improve the process in all cases. The other one was forecasting. So I know from dealing with logistics providers, they always say, well, if I had a great forecast, I could do a better job. And we had a good argument between the OEMs and the suppliers about, which came first, the chicken or the egg, really. But essentially, better predictive forecasting will help all parts of the supply chain to work better together. The other theme was collaboration. How do the different legs of the supply chain work well together? Clearly, having a good relationship is very helpful, but having more information also helps with providing good service, and clearly everyone wants to provide very good service to the OEMs. A couple of outliers, if you will, and Louis, maybe for a next conference, I don't know if you've ever done this, but the theme of customs, especially for vessels arriving in Europe, seems to be a huge problem. So I don't know if maybe you have someone come and talk about that in a future conference, because I learned that clearing a vessel from the United States or from elsewhere, it's not a problem for short sea in Europe, but when vehicles are arriving from overseas, they can take up to 1,000 spaces in a port facility, and they're really at the whim of customs to clear that vessel. And it can take, we've heard, up to 2 weeks for a vessel to clear. And that seems, coming from North America, that seems ridiculous. But so there's an opportunity there. We talked a little bit about standard coding between the OEMs with the suppliers, so that everyone knew exactly what the codes meant for across all OEMs. So that's a good opportunity as well. And transparency, really transparency throughout the whole supply chain will help everyone improve that supply chain and move vehicles a lot faster. So that was pretty well it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you for your suggestion about the customs, and we'll look into it. And of course, the egg and the chicken, it's obvious. The egg comes first because you have that for breakfast, and you have the chicken for dinner. So it's obvious which way round it goes. So now looking at self-orchestrating supply chains. Paul Nurse from ProAct. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis. It's fair to say that I think this session generated far more questions than it did answers, really. The first thing really we discussed was what is it? What is a self-orchestrating supply chain? Is it about AI, machine learning, autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks, ghost ships? digitization, platooning, all those kind of things, you know, is that really what it's about? And all those things play a part in this, but and clearly the result of that is a lot more generation of data. So it's the traditional IoT thing and big data and being able to process all that in the supply chain. But I think the change starts more at the beginning. So we're looking at sort of the traditional or the current consumer products, whereby you might buy a refrigerator, it monitors the contents of your fridge, and when it finds you've run out of milk or whatever it might be, it automatically creates the orders and sends those off. And so self-orchestrating really starts with demand. And also then the actual requirements being embodied by the product itself. And finished vehicles is probably a good analogy in that, you know, the cars themselves are becoming far more intelligent. As time goes on, they become autonomous. We're already starting to send real-time information about battery charge status and various status elements of the car. And ultimately, it may be then that the car is off production, is programmed with its own requirement, where it's going, the order information, and it becomes self-aware to some extent of its own destiny, what it needs to do, where it needs to go in the supply chain, and rather than us sort of taking manual action in there, it will automatically switch its language to X because it knows it's going to a particular country. It knows when to put itself on hold. It will request battery charge. It will stop itself in a particular location to have parts upfitted to it or modified. So again, it becomes partly the ordering up front, and then partly the product itself embodying what it needs to do and how it needs to behave through the supply chain. We discussed the supporting technology to process this data, so whether the technology is centralized, whether it's a control tower that has a view of everything, and there was the opinion that we need to have a view of the overall picture in order to make decisions and respond to the supply chain. But then there was also the decentralized argument, if you like, the blockchain argument, where we have more autonomous cells making their own sort of localized decisions, and possibly there was more resilience and faster reacting to situations within the supply chain. So there was a debate between the centralized and decentralized approach. One of the main characteristics, I think, that we determined that a self-orchestrating supply chain should be, one of the main benefits is really dealing with exceptions, dealing with problems. Obviously, when a supply chain is running smoothly, everything's great. The problem occurs in that small percentage of exceptions, and that's where most of the value of a carrier, a service provider, that's where the value is felt in how we respond to situations, how we deal with weather situations or strikes or port disruptions, all those kind of things. So it's how one of these systems, this technology, would automatically be able to respond to that and know through whether it's AI or machine learning or whatever the technology, how to respond to that in the most efficient way. So you can sit back and let these things sort themselves out. And that's a true, seen to be a true self-orchestrating supply chain. There was a lot of discussion about impact on staff and employees and how that would affect the industry, whether the effect was initially on white collar or blue collar in terms of what this impact might be. And let's just look at here. I mean, one of the other questions was, what are the benefits, what are the threats? And it was seen as a clear benefit to manufacturers, because all of these things gives you, more real-time visibility, faster response. Clearly from a manufacturer point of view, the benefits were easily seen. I think what was more difficult was from a carrier, from a service provider point of view, what the impact was, whether this was a threat. And how do you differentiate yourself in an environment where things are theoretically managing themselves? And there was no clear answer to that. The only sort of answer was that you have to embrace the change, embrace the technology, invest in the technology. And those were the things that, that it came down to that. The rest of it then, time will tell how it impacts. But clearly avoiding it is not the way to go. And it was mentioned that, one of the benefits might be that it may weed out some of the weaker suppliers, and those suppliers are not so forward-thinking, providers are not so forward-thinking in the supply chain. There was a lot of discussion about how far off this was, what the impacts of legislation would be, better use of assets. Somebody gave the example of, I think it was the Toronto tram system that during the day is obviously carrying passengers and during the night is used to carry cargo. So again, better utilization, if you like, maybe more sort of Uberization of the supply chain. And then disruptors, people like Amazon, people like Dyson Cars, all these companies that have changed the perception of you know, what the supply chain is, how quickly it should be there. The old concept years ago of the 5-day car, I think it was GM, you know, we're getting to the point where that is now more achievable, maybe a lot less than 5 days. So the whole consumer market and Amazon, people like that, have changed the perception of what is the norm for a supply chain and logistics. So that whole perception has changed. I'll just try and finish off here. One of the interesting points that was made, that the result of this was possibly that from an environmental point of view, it results in more CO2. But the CO2 per item, per part, per shipment would actually reduce. So that's an interesting observation that was made in this because of the ease and the granularity of the supply chains. I think finally, and we finished off really with what's the expectation of a self-orchestrating supply chain? I mean, the expectations probably remain the same from a manufacturer point of view: quicker, faster, more secure, better quality, and then cheaper. So we might have to change the mindset a little bit there, because all those things don't necessarily equate to cheaper. So we kind of left it there. Who really benefits from this? What are the impacts? And I suppose the underlying question to an orchestration of a supply chain is ultimately, who is the conductor? Okay.
Thanks very much. Self-orchestrated supply chains. I'm sure that'd be music to our ears. And now, Aftermarket Dynamics by Steve from Syncreon. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Louis. Yeah, we spent the first sort of 5-10 minutes looking at the guys sat over there, thinking, well, there's 4 people on that table, 4 on this table, and we spent 10 minutes talking about 3D printing and aftermarket. So we echoed your thoughts there about the future. We had a really good session yesterday, actually, with a lot of the same guys involved in the debate, and we talked about aftermarket and really looked at 4 sort of real key areas of what's happening in the marketplace. So the ownership models, the change of ownership of cars, obviously electrification and the changes that are coming with batteries and the challenges that they present. Digitalization, the information that not only the dealers and the OEMs get, but also the information that the driver, us customers, what we get as we're driving along. And somebody just mentioned over there as well the Amazon model, which has got a lot to answer for, I think, in terms of what we're doing. And really what we tried to focus on today was drive it down a little bit closer into how it impacted 3 different groups of people, one being the OEM, and the OEM slash the dealerships, the guys who are the shop window to the car manufacturers. The 3PLs, the logistics providers, what they're doing and the models that are changing for them, and also ultimately the customer. What does the customer want? Well, what do we all want? When we're going out buying our new cars. And I guess just sort of summarising really where we got to with those 3 categories of people. The OEMs, there are massive pressures around part sales. They're seeing a decline in physical parts that are being sold as the independent, the motor factors are coming up and selling patent parts. The dealership profitability, are the number of dealers that are in the market, is it sustainable? Are they selling the parts? Are they selling the cars? Are they getting the footfall through the dealerships? The dealer model, the future of the dealer model, we're seeing some manufacturers, Tesla will open a dealership in a local shopping mall. So while we go shopping for clothes, we can also go and have a look at a car. we're talking about the span of control. So historically, the OEMs have had total visibility, total control of the part sales, because it was all done through one channel, and that's now starting to move. So they're losing the visibility of the vehicles as they're losing customers after the warranty period's finished. So people are moving away from the dealerships and going to local garages and getting parts from alternative suppliers. I think from a customer point of view, and this is everybody in the room, the modern day customer is more savvy. We all sit there at home. I do, my wife does, on Amazon, ordering things. And when we go onto Amazon, we search, we look, we're given lots of different options, we're given choices. But not only are we given the choice of price, we're given the choice of delivery. We can decide when we want it, when we want to get it. Do we want to pay more to get it tomorrow? Do we want to pay more to get it same day sometimes? And that is a trend that is absolutely coming through the aftermarket. And we go back 5, 10 years, and the model of going into a dealer, getting your car diagnosed with a problem, and then booking it in for a week's time and having the parts come from a central DC, sometimes from a different country. Very, very slow supply chain. That is not acceptable these days. People want to get the cars fixed. They want to get it done efficiently. They want to get it done at the best possible price. So we're seeing the customers now having a lot more choice. And I think from a 3PL point of view, from a logistics provider's point of view, we go into a warehouse 10 years ago, and we go into a warehouse today, and we don't actually see an awful lot of change. There are challenges, and as we see the impact of the market changing, what we're now seeing is a move away from RDCs, CDCs through to LDCs. So we're trying now to move parts a lot closer to the end user. So the end user can make a choice. They can push a button, pick up the phone, they can place their order, and the parts will be delivered within an hour or within 2 hours. And that's changing the concept of logistics now from big sheds, big lorries driving around at night to smaller collaborative facilities. So no longer a dedicated OEM, it could be a multi-brand OEM facility. And it's small vans rather than lorries delivering parts on a high frequency. And that is all then underpinned by a more collaborative IT platform. I think that was about it, Louis.
All right, perfect, thank you.
Very good.
We talk a lot about the disruption from Amazon, but I think aftermarket is the one that's really going to have the biggest effect. So keeping the lid on dangerous goods packaging, something that I know is particularly important, or you're studying a lot at CHEP. So I'd look forward to hearing what your discussion was like.
Yeah, thank you. Last and least, the weird cousin of packaging, dangerous goods packaging. So we immediately jumped on the lithium-ion batteries because that's the obvious stuff we need to be prepared for. And there's a huge wave inbound from Asia into Europe. It requires dangerous goods packaging. We have to build knowledge around this. We have LSPs, and we as a packaging providers and packaging manufacturers at the table. Do we have the right knowledge to ship that packaging according to the regulations, which are country-based and global regulation? It's a different concept than just shipping parts. So these experts are going to be a high-valued resource in the future. Standardization is also one of the topics. Different OEMs using different batteries. The Tesla battery that looks like an AA-sized battery. That is a cell they're shipping. Then we have modules that look like a loaf of bread, but all different sizes, different OEMs, different shipping. So standardization within the OEM, that could be a good topic, but cross-OEM cooperation, that might be something that should be nurtured on this. the costing of the one-way packaging. That is insanely expensive. We're not talking about the regular €6 cardboard box. That is 30, 40 euros per box. Is that included? Do we have this on the radar, that we have a huge amount of packaging cost inbound? In regards to the recycling, it is a one-way flow. It goes from Asia into Europe. There is nothing going back. So that's an interesting part, and John also mentioned that for the aftermarket, it's going to be interesting. How do you ship it back from a shop into a recycling facility? That's a different dangerous goods regulation. So batteries will be highly challenging for us in the supply chain. Regulations, positive and negative impacts. China is putting a lot of regulation that are forcing the battery suppliers to innovate, like we had earlier in the discussion. So that's quite positive. But on the other side, it's a huge risk, because just imagine you couldn't bring your mobile in a passenger phone anymore. You have to check it in, because it's regulated as a lithium-ion battery. It could happen. Tracking and sensoring, we have a nice overlap here with the colleagues on the other table. Do we really need to know? Do we want to know? Do we value that information, what happened during transit with the battery? There's implications on insurance as well. Can we prove that my supply chain is smooth and flawless, and I can guarantee that my battery will not fail and have the car explode? So could be a nice value add. And we are also missing some new players on the market. Samsung, LG, huge corporations. That's going to be the tail wagging the dog here if we try to dictate to them what kind of packaging we want. So that's people that we need to talk to also from a logistics point of view. What is a good packaging to bring line side to the point of use for transport optimization? Do they really care? So we raise a lot of questions. As a side note, finished vehicle logistics going to be interesting, because you can ship a Tesla that is fully mounted with the batteries. It's not dangerous goods. But if you want to ship the battery pack inside it, you have to follow strong regulations on it. That's quite weird. And could be also a risk if regulation catch up on that. So, well, we didn't solve it, but we raised some good questions, and hopefully get you thinking on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Although surely the answer is obvious, just make your packaging look like a Tesla. Solves all the problems. But thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the think tanks. I hope you understood and enjoyed the concept that small groups and perhaps more honest or intimate discussions on and drilling down a little bit on the subjects. So I hope you enjoyed them and got good value from them. Please remember the lessons from them. Don't walk away and think, yeah, that was really good, and then forget about it, because when you go back to your office on Monday, you're getting caught up back in today's problems. Anything discussed in the think tanks that you would like to develop, would like us to develop, whether it's editorially, events, as you said earlier, Pat, on LinkedIn groups or something, please let us know, because what's important to you is what's important to us. So let us know what we can do to follow up or develop some of the themes that you've discussed in your think tanks. But otherwise, I just wanted to thank all the leaders of the think tanks for leading the discussions. Thank you very much, everyone. And just a reminder, if you're leaving early, please fill in the evaluation forms, as again, they're very important to us and we do really act on them. So let us know your honest thoughts so we can develop the programs that you need, and so we can provide the best possible service for you. But because as you can look at me and realize that food's quite important to me, so join us for lunch, some more networking, and we'll be back in this room for how to be an award winner in automotive logistics at 2:00. Thank you very much.